welcome back to Cookie Pocket. This podcast is about film, episode 45. Today we are talking about our second silent film on the show, and also our first German Expressionist film, which is fun because that's one of my favorite filmic genres. We're going to be talking about F.W. Murnau's Nosferatu from 1922. Now, this is an adaptation of Dracula, the second we've had on the show. Lots of recurrences in this episode. So we all kind of know the story already, but in this specific version, an estate agent named Hutter goes to the Carpathian Mountains to organize the move of a mysterious Count Orlok from his castle to the German town of Wisborg, only to find himself imprisoned in the castle, and Orlok moves back to town, bringing a plague with him that begins to kill a slew of people. So pretty familiar story compared to Dracula, with some differences. But as we always do, let's start with overall thoughts. What did you guys think of Nosferatu, a symphony of horror?
Well, I will start by saying I enjoyed it. I know that sometimes the more artsy stuff, I might be the least inclined of us to give it the credit it deserves. But in this case, I think that this is very clearly an important film and one that exceeds in almost every conceivable mandate for the time in which it was made. I wrote in my Letterboxd review that I personally struggle with silent film just because of the way that it is structured. And specifically the cue card thing, as opposed to there being subtitles while something is happening. I strongly prefer subtitles personally, because there were moments in this where I was kind of just, I had read the cue card and then it was sitting there for like 5 more seconds and it felt like a really long time to wait for the next scene, which sounds like a very minor quibble. And I don't mean to use this as like a critical shortcoming of this movie, because I that's not the case at all. But I do think with silent film, and I say this in my Letterboxd review, there's a degree of redundancy when you are forced to show and tell basically everything. And that's just kind of built into the experience for me. So I wanted to share that just as a means of grounding my thoughts. But this is in and of itself is actually pretty scary. There are a few moments that are, I didn't jump in my seat, but I went, oh, that's pretty scary. And I have to imagine that an audience 100 years ago would probably be pretty terrified by what's shown on screen. So massive credit to the actors and in terms of direction as well. And the music is absolutely beautiful. So all in all, I was very impressed. It had the same difficulties that I might express with other silent films. And that's just part of the medium. Mm-hmm. The same way that I would say black and white, I won't say it's hampered, but I just think it is the grayscale thing, I think, is inherently less stimulating to the human eye than a broader range of color. And again, that's independent from any critical notes about a specific film. But aside from all of those hurdles I have personally with the medium, I thought that it was great. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. I might give it higher if I were to ever watch it again, and I would recommend it to anyone that thinks they could get through a silent film.
Yeah, good job, Christian.
Thank you. Yes, good job, because I was worried you were going to go boring 1 out of 5. Like, I was worried about this movie, so I'm glad that you enjoyed it.
I've grown.
I enjoyed this. I have a very big open mind, even though I'm more of a practical and less of an artistic person. But I sincerely enjoyed most aspects of this film. Literally the only act where I was like, yeah, that could have been changed pretty drastically was the first act, because it was pretty much just dragging like how I would expect a silent film to drag. And it felt what Christian had said about the cue card thing is like really apparent in that. It might just be because I have to get used to the fact that there's going to be cue cards, but I do feel like the scenes later on definitely were conveying stronger messages and getting to the meat of what the film was really about. Which is probably the point, but I mean, I don't think it worked as well for me. But besides that, I mean, and also like Zach had said in his review, the score is kind of weird at some points. And,
At some points, yeah.
Yeah, and it definitely reminds me of the Phantom Carriage when it was like the I'm like, what am I watching? But that's like, I mean, that's like almost never happens, and it really, really comes together towards the end. And I totally agree with Christian, even though I'm not big brain music man. I think it sounded like it was composed great, and it had a lot of depth to it. And yeah, and I feel like the expressionism and things like that, and there's like tons of themes that are incredibly difficult to portray as a silent film, and the fact that it did it so well and that you can take so much from this is really says. I mean, I can't even express in words how much it says, but it's just insane that they were even able to create something like this at this time and have so much messaging to it that's like completely timeless. So yeah, that's like my biggest compliments. I mean, the acting I think is great. I don't think it's exaggerated to the point of like, yeah, this is just like a theater play that I didn't want to see. It's like the acting's actually like pretty representative of what's going on most of the time. And then Max Schreck is like second to none. Like he's probably one of, if not the best portrayals of the Dracula character, the vampire, character from Bram Stoker. So, yeah, I gave it a 4 out of 5, and I think it's really great. I mean, like Christian said, anybody who could get through a silent film, I feel like this is definitely one you have to see. And if you're at all interested in the original story, I think this is probably a good portrayal of it based on what I know.
Well, good, yeah. On the note of the cue cards, I think it's interesting you guys point out that they do kind of slow down the movie because F.W. Murnau, the director of this movie, would agree with you. He notoriously hated cue cards because he felt that they interrupted the pace of a movie. And so his later films, he used them less and less, and some of his later movies feature absolutely no dialogue at all, and it's just a purely visual experience. Even when he started to make sound films, he has a film called Sunrise, which is in sound, but there's no dialogue. It's just Foley and diegetic sound and score, and it's entirely bringing you into a world without dialogue, which I think is really interesting. And maybe you guys would see eye to eye with him on that. But yeah, I will mention that this is a movie that really holds a lot of importance to me because I'm pretty sure it was the very first horror movie I ever saw.
Wow.
Which horror is a very important genre to me, so This definitely has an impact on me. And from the age of about 11 to 14, it was my favorite movie.
Oh my god!
This is a movie that held a lot of significance to me at a young age. I think it is, which I think the fact that I was such a fan of it when I was so young illustrates that it really does kind of, it's timeless. Yes, it's a silent movie, and yes, it does kind of creak with age in the way that some of the shots are edited together, but what is scary and what is interesting to the human mind is always going to be interesting to the human mind. Horror doesn't age and doesn't die over time. There's going to be something there, regardless of what time period you watch it in. And I think this is a great example of that. Like you guys said, it's a great score. Unlike The Phantom Carriage, which we talked about last season, where that was a score that was kind of replicated from what the original score might have been. This is the original score that would have been played in the 20s. It's a great score. I do think in places, though, like you said, Mitchell, especially kind of during the beginning, it feels a little too light and quirky in some of the scary moments. But towards the end, it starts to get really heavy, and the drums and the cymbals start to come in during the frightening moments, and that's where I think it really works. So it's a 4 out of 5 for me. I really love it. But we commented kind of on the things that it may take from Dracula, on its being an adaptation of Dracula. This is the second adaptation of Dracula that we've talked about this season. In, I think, episode 5 or 6 of this season, we talked about Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula. So I just want to discuss right now, how do we think that this compares to that film as an adaptation of the novel? Are there things that we think it does better? Are there things that we think it does worse? Which do you think fares better overall in comparison to that book?
That's a good question. I'm going to say this is a point of information and not as a point of criticism, but I do think it's interesting that this was not, how do you say, he didn't have permission to make this
it was,
adaptation, I guess. And
it was illegal. It was an
Yeah.
unofficial illegal adaptation of the movie.
I have to assume that that's why all the characters' names are kind of switched around. And maybe that's coincidental or another reason to befuddle that, sort of.
Yeah, you would think so. But then again, in the opening credits, it does say it's based on Dracula. So what are you trying to hide? Like,
Yeah. Who knows? Who knows what those Germans were thinking? What was the question? What was the adaptations? Right.
yeah,
Okay.
how do you think it compares?
I think that this does more justice to the source material, mostly for reasons we discussed in our other Dracula episode, in that Coppola's style really just swallows it whole, I think. And there's a lot more space to breathe, and some of that's pacing with the cue cards, or maybe even occasionally a negative. But I think you just get more moments with characters, I guess. I don't know his name, but earlier on, the simp boy who's smiling, I don't know his name.
Hutter? The main
Sure.
character?
Yes,
Huta.
that guy.
Okay.
And he's like smiling. I have no idea. I have no precise recollection of this moment, but I remember his smile, and I am like, okay, I have this character, and it feels real, and the acting is not overwrought, and there's a moment here, and a language barrier and a sound barrier does nothing to inhibit that at all, which is a massive strength in many of the performances in this. So I would lean towards this adaptation. I definitely enjoyed this one more, despite the fact that Bram Stoker's Dracula had every advantage between the year it was made and the cast and the fact that it's in color and not silent. But they're very different at the same time. So even though they're adapting the same thing, I feel like they're trying to do different things as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I feel like if the only two movies I ever saw were this and then the Dracula adaptation we saw previously, it would be like I would rate the one we saw previously like Zach rated Paul Blart, and it's because I don't know. I have a bit of a period supremacy problem where when films are created in a certain period of time and they really express themes of that period of time incredibly well, and while using, in this case, also using an original story that I would consider pretty good, even though I haven't actually read the book. Spoiler. But I don't know. I don't know. I guess I feel like there's a couple characters that are merged in this,
Oh, yeah.
and I'm not sure if that's okay. Well, that's true. Good for me. I agree with Christian though. I like this better, and in general, and I feel like this feels more adherent to source material than the other one does. And I feel like even without reading the source material, you can kind of get a sense that there's kind of a strong adherence to certain events, like they have to do, like the ship theme and things like
Yeah.
like the ship sequence is a big difference between the two adaptations for me. I basically hate the one in the Bram Stoker's Dracula. And
It's very
I
rushed.
really like this
Yeah.
one. And that one, it's just like the narration and the turning of the camera. It's just like way too much. Like literally, I'm sure the book described it like that, but you don't have to like go all out and trying to like throw every single, modern style thing into it to make it look really cool and sound really cool. I feel like if you just leave it to the rest of it to your imagination, that works perfectly fine. Even when the ship it's a green tint to show that it's at nighttime and it's at daytime. And Dracula rises up in front of a porthole that's daytime, and just does not take me out of it at all. So I completely agree with Christian. Like all those barriers and all of the problems that the film has for its time are very, very rarely hamper the quality of it. And I'm sure it's a very adherent adaptation where it needs to be, because I don't even think about it as being a poor adaptation at any point. I mean, I don't know. I think it stands fine on its own, and I don't think I don't feel like they tried to underdo anything. I feel like it was pretty cohesive.
Yeah. What I will say, I think both adaptations do have their merits. I don't think that Bram Stoker's Dracula is like an awful movie or anything. I don't even think it's an awful adaptation. What I think Bram Stoker's Dracula does really well, the Coppola's version, is it gets the events of the novel. It pretty much adapts everything beat for beat from the novel. It's got all the events there, but the tone is really changed. Bram Stoker's Dracula is really over-the-top, bloody, colorful, sexy movie. And the book is not that. The book is kind of a much more restricted, kind of toned-down horror story, which I think this Nosferatu gets really well. It doesn't get the events necessarily. Characters are merged, big things are cut out and moved around, but I think it nails the tone of that original novel. This sort of restrictive, subtly creepy in a lot of ways story that Francis Ford Coppola's version just... I mean, there's blood cannons in that movie that just explode all over the walls, and that does not happen in the original book. It's much more of kind of a reserved Victorian drawing room drama in places compared to that hyper 90s version. Christian, I'm kind of going off road here by my own plan, but you mentioned in your overall thoughts that there were aspects of this movie that you found genuinely frightening in places. So I'm just interested to know, and Mitchell, you can chime in here as well. If there are things in this film that you did still find creepy, what were those aspects?
Well, the simplest answer is just Count Orlok.
And yeah, Max Schreck just doing anything.
Yeah.
Literally standing still, dude. That guy is just freaked me out. SpongeBob SquarePants hash-slinging slasher reference. Like, I just can't... him just standing there. And the score definitely helps. And I'm sure that the score is psychologically more influential considering it's a silent film. But I don't know. I just... He moves at just the perfect pace. And the reactions to him are overdramatic to fit the tone, like it perfectly. And it's just like, it's something that's probably going to be missing from cinema forever, because this is kind of like trodden ground to people today, to most artists trying to think of something original. It's like, why would be like, I was going to mention, Zach, not to go on another bridge
go right ahead.
this trail. We're going way into the woods now, but the sexuality thing. The whole concept of the vampire is already like is symbolically sexual to begin with. Him biting necks and thing, all of that is already symbolic. We don't need to have full on sexual scenes in a film for that to be portrayed, and it completely devalues one of the major aspects of Dracula to begin with. So that's just one major example to me. But what was the question?
Things you found frightening.
Max Schreck is big boy scary, and I wouldn't say that like the scenes where they're like overreacting and like being scared are scary. I just feel like not knowing what he's going to do next and the anticipation is just perfectly paced whenever he's on the screen for me.
For sure.
I think
I'm glad you mentioned the point about how the original story and vampires are kind of sexually charged, and I did want to say about the novel. I gave it a go. I tried finishing it before this episode, and I didn't. I'm about halfway.
Okay.
But I will say, I think I would not overstate how reserved the novel is, because I do think it is kind of an erotic work in Victorian clothing, honestly. Like it's very, very easy to see that more sensual, I guess, side of it, and Coppola definitely cranks that up to 1,000. But
he turns subtext into text, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And frightening things. The only other thing, I don't know if I would call this inherently frightening, but I was kind of like, oh, interesting. The footage of the wolves, I think, in the first 20 minutes or so, I thought that was really cool, and I wondered how the heck did they get that without getting bitten or something, but not something that made me jump. Yeah, I thought it might have been a hyena. It was
a hyena. Yeah.
Okay.
Which I think kind of adds to it. I don't know. I don't know the backstory of the hyena. Maybe they rented a wolf, and on the day they were like, "All we got is this hyena." But I think the fact that it is a hyena kind of lends to this feeling that we're in a strange land. Because Germany. I'm pretty sure there are wolves in Germany. But even if you're just like 1920s German like Joe Schmo going to see a film, like what a wolf looks like. But if the wolves in this land look like hyenas, that kind of adds an additional level of where are we? This is a little weird. I think you guys are kind of on the money with the idea of the vampire kind of being inherently sexual in a certain way. One of the most famous stills from this movie is towards the end, where Orlok is kind of leaned over Ellen, and he kind of looks up at the camera, and that shot, like on its own, it does have a kind of salacious nature to it, where there is kind of a sexual nature to his being drawn to Ellen towards the end. And I think you guys are also really have a point with Max Schreck as well. I think he's, in my original review that I did of this film, like last September, I'd seen it countless times before then, but I only reviewed it last September for the first time. I described his performance as like one of the pinnacles in horror, because I think his performance in this movie feels so modern compared to everyone else. When everyone else in this expressionist film is moving around and throwing their limbs all over the place, he's so still and so subtle, and does so many things with just a little look of his eyes or twitch of the eyebrow. But at the same time, when he becomes, I guess you'd say when he's on the hunt, when he's hungry, his eyes go wide and his teeth show up and his hands go up. And I think there's something very creepy about that. Shots like him in the castle at the far end of the corridor, just kind of looking at Hutter's doorway, or on the other side of the river in the window of the warehouse, just kind of staring at Ellen. I think those are shots that remain creepy. People see photos of that because I think Nosferatu, the character, is all over the place. I mean, he showed up in an episode of SpongeBob, for goodness sake. People see images of that character and go, oh, that's creepy. Even though they may not know anything about the context of the shot, like they know that is a creepy performance from a creepy character. And like I said, I think that's timeless. I don't think horror...
I hope they make a Max Schreck 2.
Yeah.
Bad.
Max Schreck 2. I need a hero.
No.
Max Schreck Forever After.
Yeah, and there's also there were like rumors at the time on set apparently that Max Schreck might have actually been a vampire, because he apparently he never appeared out of costume, and he always like stayed away from the cast. Like there's on-set photographs of Max Schreck that are like creepier than anything in this film, where he's just kind of standing in a shadow looking at somebody.
Are you okay, Max?
Be right back. I have to go add Max Schreck as Zach Garrigus to the rundown. 1 second.
Oh, that's what I meant to say. Oops. Forgot to put that in there.
Yeah, great performer, great performance. Lots of fantastic shots of him throughout the film. Now, as with most genre films from this period, this is a movie that kind of pushed the boundaries of special effects at the time. This was actually one of the first movies to show a vampire or any person dissolving or dying in sunlight on camera, and there's lots of other kind of nifty practical and in-camera effects throughout. Much like The Phantom Carriage, which we talked about last season. That really pushed the boundaries of special effects as well. So I wanted to ask, what are your thoughts on the special effects in this film, and how do you think they compare to the special effects in The Phantom Carriage, which we were also pretty wowed by?
I feel like they're a lot more restricted here, and I think used maybe like 6 times maybe throughout the whole film. And I think that's really good. I feel like that's kind of playing off of the timeless aspect of this by the fact that it's used so limited. So if you do like it, it's there. But if you don't like it, it's not used enough times to not justify its use. So I think it's fine. I really like the stop motion thing. I think that just adds to the level of weird fantasy kind of aspect to a vampire. And I guess what's the effect where he's invisible, like we saw in the Phantom Carriage? That one, when he's on the ship, that totally works fine.
Oh yeah, like a double exposure.
Yeah, double exposure. And I don't know. Phantom Carriage had different themes and different ways of portraying fear, horror. But I don't know. I think it works fine in this. I don't think it's very intrusive at all. And I think it's like it just tells more about what time it's from. And period supremacy again. So it's like, the only time where it bothers me really is the coffin thing. when he's putting the coffins on the
I could see that,
like
Yeah.
tons of different problems with that, and it's weird. Okay, that did not age well. But when he's opening the door and he's standing there, and it's like, and they could have done a stop motion thing where they had like 20 shots, but he had like 1, 2, 3, and he's right there, and it's like a surprise. And I think that's great. I think that they could do that today, and I wouldn't be complaining. It would just be us three laughing and clapping while the entire audience is like, "What the hell is this?" So we're watching it. But yep, I really like it. I think it's really cool.
Yeah. I don't have much to add. I thought it was, I pretty much entirely agree. I'll just heap more praise on the Phantom Carriage's effects because I was really, really, really wowed by them when we watched that one. And I'll similarly say that if I saw something like what the Phantom Carriage did in the theater today, it would work for me on the same level that like the most effectively used CGI ever might work for me. If not better, probably better. Like I cannot overstate how much the Phantom Carriage effects wowed me and made me go, "Wow, George."
Was that the end of your thought?
I think so.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, I think I can agree with you, Mitchell. I think this is less of a special effects movie that the Phantom Carriage was. I think part of the reason it's introducing new special effects is because film was only like 20 years old as a medium at the time, so you could still have a new idea in the 1920s. But I do think there are still some really effective effects here. One of the most iconic being in the ship when the coffin lid goes off and he vertically rises up out of the coffin. That's a shot that so many other adaptations of Dracula have referenced, including Bram Stoker's Dracula. Right. There's a shot where he does that in that film. I think here the effects are kind of less is more. Rising out of the coffin, that same kind of double exposure shot where he's just kind of perched on the end of a coffin staring at the sailor. I do agree him loading up his coffins is kind of janky because he's moving so fast because they clearly just kind of overcranked the camera. But I think in other places, like the doors opening, it totally works. And weirdly for me, I've seen people laugh at when Orlok first gets off the ship. He's kind of walking around Visborg with his coffin under his arm, and I've seen people laugh at that. But I could kind of see that because he sort of looks like he doesn't know what to do with himself, and he's just kind of like, What building is my class in? Like I could see some comedy there, but at the same time, the shot where he's kind of standing in the boat and it's just going across the canal, and he's got his coffin under his arm as he approaches the building. I think that really works. So for everything that has kind of dated in this movie, I think there's another shot or another scene that is just as timeless to kind of knock it back and even out the score again. Yeah. Well, that kind of brings us to the end of the questions that I had. But any final thoughts on Nosferatu before we move on to our other segments?
4 out of 5. Recommend it. I really recommend. I mean, if you like horror at all, you should definitely see this. It should be the I don't know. I can't think of any idioms. Something in your pocket. Your cookie, the cookie in your pocket,
cookie in your pocket,
and it's got some really good themes to it, and I would probably recommend reading the book. I think contextualizing this may help its value, and there's a lot of creepy scenes in it, and it's a very, very good representation of Dracula. The Mr. Orlok, whatever his first name is, Grom Orlok or whatever. Yeah, 4 out of 5. Woo.
Yeah. I gave this a 3.5 out of 5. I would similarly recommend it, and I would just say the story of Dracula is one that I think has broad appeal because it's a horror story, and it's also, I think, very romantic, and there are humorous moments, and just generally it is very much one of these icons of literature, I think, at least partially because of how much it brings to the table. And I think all of those things are true in this adaptation. There's a lot of great performances here, and in the same way that Zach might notice Orlok more than I probably noticed the romantic bits in the beginning a little bit more. And I think whatever your genre sensibilities might be, you will find something in here that probably speaks to you a little bit more. And I think that's really special and a testament to how well-rounded this effort is. So if you can get through a silent film, I would recommend it.
Yeah.
Graf
Or like or lake. Graf or luck. There we go.
Settle down on the drink, Zach.
I'll just say before we move on, if you can, I really recommend trying to find the Kino Lorber edition of this film. The print that you can find on most places, Tubi, it's on the Wikipedia page for this film because this film is public domain because it's so old. But that's like a French nitrate cut, which is 10 minutes shorter. It doesn't have any of the color tinting. And Hans Erdmann's score has been significantly altered, and I think all three of those things have a significant effect on how you experience the film, the color tinting especially. So if you can, I'd really recommend trying to get the Kino version instead of just the public domain one that's out and about. But all right, time to move on then to the week in review. What have you guys been watching or consuming since our last episode?
Besides blood.
Besides blood. Oh, negative, yes.
Oh dear.
Christian, go first. I don't know what I'm doing.
I've tried to avoid music on this podcast, but then Zach started doing it, so I guess I might as well hop on the bandwagon. Recently, John Mayer put out a new album. Yes, I know. I'm saying that publicly. Oh dear. I think he's a great musician. I think he's a rare guitar-based talent amongst sort of the cultural zeitgeist of today that is more governed by musicians that are singers first and anything else second, if anything else, which is fine. But I think John has a pretty good sensibility in terms of constructing a song around more than just a vocal melody. And this new album is called Sob Rock, yes, and it's very much constructed around this 80s aesthetic of like a soft rock, weepy pop type of thing. The opening track sounds a lot like a Toto song, and there's heavy influence there. But he does lean into the cheesiness, and it is self-effacing and also at points uniquely sad, and just generally I think a really strong effort from him. And anyone who likes pop or rock music or guitars, I would recommend this album to you.
Okay. That might be the most that anybody's talked about John Mayer in a decade. All right.
Come on, Zach.
Do you still need more time, Mitchell, or?
No, I'm good, Judge.
Okay.
I saw Uncle Buck. Uncle Buck. Speaking of supremacy, John Candy.
Yes.
God.
Legend.
I don't know how you couldn't think he's at least a little bit funny just by him standing around saying things is funny. Yeah. And he's absolutely timeless. And, John Hughes is very hit or miss for most people. I think generally everybody agrees about Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and that's about it. Maybe even contention there. But but this is definitely one of his more heartfelt films. Has a lot of oversympathetic hues to it, and that may turn some people off, and it kind of comes to a big T at the end, and like the music gets really intense, and you're like, all right, I just came to see John Candy funny, and that's pretty much it. But besides the kind of some over exaggeration in the tone, and the kids being Macaulay Culkin happens to be there, and I think he's better in this than Home Alone, hot take. But he's like super witty, and the other kid is super witty, and Tia is just like completely like definition of standoffish, just like total teenager, and it's really annoying. And she's just like, what do you mean you're asking me how my day's going, kind of attitude the entire time. And all of a sudden she just like, oh yeah, Uncle Buck's actually cool, and that's basically her whole arc. But other than that, I mean, if you really like John Candy at all, if you like Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, yes, there's definitely similar beats to that. And there's typical John Hughes 80s, influence there. But otherwise, I highly, highly recommend it. I really liked it. I think I gave it a 4 out of 5. And yeah, I mean, John Candy's just hilarious. I don't know what else to say.
Okay. Well, as often happens in Week in Review, it's my job to drastically change the tone. Because last night I watched The Game, which is a David Fincher film that I don't think gets a lot of recognition. It's his third film technically, but he would probably call it his second because he's kind of divorced himself from Alien 3, which was his debut officially. But it's about a wealthy investment banker played by Michael Douglas, whose brother, played by Sean Penn, gives him a birthday gift, which is some kind of an experience with this vague entertainment company he's never heard of. And he goes to check it out, and it turns out they organize something they call a game, which is organized based on and distributed based on a survey around somebody's personal life, and is perfectly tailored to add what's missing to their lifestyle. And Michael Douglas casually just kind of fills it out and goes, yeah, whatever, we'll see what happens. And his life turns upside down. Is he involved in the game, or is something more sinister happening? I would say I really, really enjoy it. I got a lot out of the movie. It has that David Fincher look and feel. Even when not a lot is happening in a David Fincher movie, he's capable of making things look really gripping and kind of drawing you in that way. I think there's a lot of commentary on kind of 90s glamour and sort of the nightmares of millionaires and billionaires. What if all my money suddenly vanished? Who really has control of my money? Stuff like that, which I think is compelling, despite the fact that the movie is about this extremely wealthy person. Fincher kind of draws you into the narrative in a way that makes you interested in what's going on with him, and kind of puts him through the ringer in a way that makes you relate to him, even though you may just be an average Joe Schmo watching the film. I don't think it's as strong as later David Fincher films. I think things like Gone Girl, maybe even Mank, are maybe films that I prefer, but I think it's very entertaining, and it might be a good first toe in the David Fincher lake for those interested in his filmography, but not quite ready to go through the miserable, pessimistic slog that is Seven, which I love Seven, but Seven will ruin your day. Don't watch Seven if you want sunshine and roses. So yeah, The Game. I recommend it. 4 out of 5.
Nice.
Yeah. So now it's time to move on to possibly the most enthusiastic magical cinema tour that you will ever experience on this show.
Oh my
Christian,
gosh.
what did you watch last night that you want to talk about?
Well, Zach, I am so glad that you asked me. If you are a loving, feeling human being,
Check 'em
please watch this movie.
Uh-oh.
I watched The Young Girls of Rochefort. I went back to Demi's classic, or in French, Les Demoiselles de Rochefort. Sorry for that. This
Oui.
film is incredible. I think I've already spoken to Demi's strengths as a director in our other episodes, and it's apparent in The Umbrellas of Cherbourg that he's really, really good at using color in an engaging way, and that is as true, if not more true here. But what really stood out to me is his skill as a writer. There are about a dozen principal players in this, and they are all very interesting and sympathetic, and you want to root for all of them. And this film is not super depressing in the way that Umbrellas of Cherbourg might be to some, but its sunnier disposition does nothing to inhibit how artful it is, or how utterly successful it is on every level. Oh my goodness. It stars, amongst others, Catherine Deneuve from Cherbourg, George Shakiri, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, who we know from West Side Story, played Bernardo, and of course Gene Kelly from Singin' in the Rain and An American in Paris fame. And I'm struggling to not spontaneously combust right now. It's difficult for me to explain how much I love this. It is one of the strongest 5 out of 5s I've ever given in my life. It earned a place amongst my top 4 films on Letterboxd. I beg you, dear listener, please see this film.
Christian, do you think it's possible that in like a year your top 5 or your top 4 on Letterboxd will be entirely to me?
It definitely will be.
It's
You
already
picked that
half to
marriage
me,
story.
so
Yeah.
we're getting there.
And then you will literally have the most profiling top 4 on Letterboxd.
Yes. Pardon, my
Oh
dog
my
is
God.
barking.
Oh. Your dog is frustrated by your exuberant emotion.
Much like I am often.
Oh man, that color in Nosferatu is just that daytime.
That tinting.
That
Magnifico.
Italian horror. Oh, freaking reds.
All right. Well, with that recommendation, why don't we move on to our oldest and most commonly occurring segment, the rundown.
Yay. Okay, we got stuff from Nosferatu to quiz Zach with. And Zach's going to give us a number, and it's going to be fun. Mitchell, are you ready to start us off?
Ich bin fertig.
Excellent. 3, 2, 1, go.
Intense Overture.
3 out of 5.
The 1920s.
4 out of 5.
A Vampire, Terrible Phantoms, and the Seven Deadly Sins.
3 out of 5.
Using someone else's IP without permission.
3 out of 5.
Getting excited over random symbols.
3 out of 5.
Simping a century ago.
3 out of 5.
Dreams feeding on my blood.
4 out of 5.
Impressive wolf hyena footage.
4 out of 5.
20's Cat.
3 out of 5.
Tinted
Tinted
everything.
4 out of 5.
Lego game coffin speedrun.
3 out of 5.
Telling someone that his wife has a lovely neck.
4 out of 5.
Weimar Republic trying to declare things.
3 out of 5.
A mild case of blood congestion.
3 out of 5.
Rat abuse.
3 out of 5.
Fingernails.
4 out of 5.
The plague.
4 out of 5.
Renamed characters to avoid legal complications.
3 out of 5.
Skeleton clock.
3 out of 5.
Carnivorous plant analogy.
3 out of 5.
The Rathmans being oblivious.
4 out of 5.
Ellen vibing. 2 seconds.
3 out of 5.
Time. Okay.
Yay!
You did it.
You were very nervous about Ellen vibing, apparently.
I almost skibbity dipped over Christian. I was getting so excited. We were going straight through him.
Wow. All
That
right.
was a
Well,
good
maybe one or two will show up at the finale. I guess we'll see.
Nope, that was it.
Was that everything?
Yeah.
Wow.
Or was it?
It was.
Oh, I guess
Or
that is
what?
the nature
I
of the
mean,
rundown.
Oh!
We'll see.
There wasn't any more.
Okay. All right. Well, next time, Mitchell, you will be hosting. So what are we going to be talking about in episode 46?
Ooh, the pianist?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, we're so depressed.
Yes.
The pianist has Adrian Brody in it.
Yes.
So if you've ever seen Peter Jackson's King Kong,
I
have. Adrian Brody is fantastic in it, and it is a fantastic film documenting certain events in the Holocaust. I believe it takes place during the Polish. It follows a Polish Jew, so
Yeah.
it kind of is from that perspective. And it's very, very well made, and I think I'll be interested in seeing your guys' opinion on it.
Adrian Brody won an Oscar for The Pianist, and yet we're referring to him as the guy from Peter Jackson's King Kong.
I love that movie, Zach.
I don't know
Me
if that's
too.
depressing or not. I don't know.
You decide,
all right.
listener.
If you want to tune back in for us to discuss a very depressing movie by all accounts in episode 46, then
Roman Polanski, by the way.
yes, Roman Polanski, which we might address briefly. But join us next time on the Cookie Podcast. This podcast is about film. Until then, goodbye,
Cookie podcast.
good night, and good
All
luck.
right, we're leaving. All right, bye.
Cookie.